Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the first round of the Grand Swiss, which is being held here in the Isle of Man, which is part of the United Kingdom. Now, this is a tournament that I played on and off over the last 6 to 7 years. I've had some pretty good results here, but this year the tournament has added importance because the top two players will qualify for the candidates tournament. And additionally, of course, I'm in the running potentially to qualify for the candidates by rating with both Ali Reza and myself at essentially the same rating around roughly 2778. So first round, I'm playing with the white piece, and I'm playing against Rasmus Svane from Germany. Now, this is a player that I've played against quite a few times. I've won every meeting so far, including a matchup that we had here in the Isle of Man, I believe in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So white piece is round one, and I decide to open with e4, and now we get e5, knight f3, knight to c6, and I play the move bishop c4. Now, Rasmus normally is a classic Caro-Kann player, but probably he doesn't want to play the Caro-Kann and lose because then it's going to reflect very poorly on Levy Rosman, also known as Gotham Chess, and all of his Caro-Kann courses. So, we get the classic Italian, or the Gucci piano as I call it. We have knight f6, d3. I decide not to play knight g5 and go for the classic fried liver because I figure my opponent is very well prepared. So I play d3, we get bishop c5, c3, d6, castles h6, I play rook e1, and now Rasmus castles. Now, one of the problems with the Gucci piano is that there are so many different setups. For starters, black can play moves like a5 here to stop b4. Black can also play a6. So you have two different pawn moves. You can also throw in h6. You can also castle and play h6 here. You can play a6. So with all these different move orders, it's very tricky to keep track of what exactly the precise setup is. So we have h6 being played. I go rook e1, castles. Now, the main reason that Rasmus played h6 is potentially if you were to castle, white can play bishop g5, and down the road, there are some lines where white maybe can sack the horse here and play f4 and open up the f file very quickly. So we get h6 from Rasmus, rook e1, castles. Now I play h3 here to stop bishop to g4, or knight to g4 as well, putting pressure on the pawn or pinning the knight on f3. So after h3 is played, Rasmus plays bishop b6. Now this is the first sort of mini surprise in the game. Obviously, I have looked at similar situations. For example, I've looked at this position with bishop b6 here without h6 being played. So I spend a bit of time. I decide to play knight bd2. We get knight to e7. And now I play this move bishop b3, intending to play for d4. Now it is worth pointing out that white can play d4 right away because after takes, if black chooses to play d5, trying to fork the bishop and the pawn on e4, white can play e5, and if takes occurs, white is simply much better due to these very, very weak black pawns on the king side. So it would have been possible to play d4 right away. Instead, I play bishop b3, intending to go d4, and let's say black plays a6. After d4 takes. Now white has a good grip on the center because d5 no longer attacks the bishop since it's no longer on the c4 square. So we get c6, I play d4, Rasmus plays knight to g6, and now I play the move bishop to c2. Now bishop c2 is a move aimed at rerouting my knight to g3, and I figure if I play knight f1 right away here, for example, I thought that Rasmus could maybe even trade, go d5, e5, and jump with this horse to knight e4, creating the classic connect 5. Additionally, after e5, knight e4, if I play a move like knight g3 here, after black, say, trades and goes f6, trying to weaken the structure in the center, I wasn't 100% sure what's going on. And I also have these double pawns on g3 and g2, which are quite weak as well. So I decide to play bishop c2 first, and now we get rook e8, and I go a4 after a long thing. Now, initially, I did want to play knight f1 here, but after knight to f1, I realized that Rasmus could play d5 right away, and the whole center is exploding. Both sides have pawns on the two central squares, e4, e4, and d4, and e5 and d5 as well. So I wanted to play knight f1, and also here to illustrate the point, let's say we get knight f1 takes d5, e5. Now knight e4 is no longer an option because the bishop covers the square. So I really wanted to play knight f1. I realized that d5 would simply explode the center. I didn't have a whole lot, so instead I decided to play a4, trying to maybe harass the bishop on b6 with a5, and also trying to take more space and maybe go b4 on the queen side as well. So Rasmus plays a5, and now I go knight f1 here. Now, initially, I thought that knight c4 was an idea, but after bishop c7, let's just say takes, and bishop to e3 here. After bishop e6, queen takes d8, and rook takes d8. Black is simply better here, because if I go knight b6, black has rook a6 trapping the white horse, and there simply are no squares to jump to. So For that reason, I decide against playing knight to c4, and instead I go knight f1 with the idea of knight g3, and now Rasmus correctly plays d5. Now, after d5, I decided to take on d5, and one reason I included a4, a5 was specifically so that I could take on this d5 square. And more specifically, besides that, I was actually kind of worried that if I were to do this right away, let's say knight f1 d5, for example, let's just say I take here. I thought that black could maybe even trade on d4 here. And in this position, after rook e8 and queen e8, knight d4, knight d5, it's completely equal. Whereas in the other line with a4 and a5 included, there is one key difference, which I will now show you. And that difference is very specifically, if takes, queen e8 is played. Here I can take on c6, because if black takes on c3, now I can play bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and I have queen b3, checking the king, but also attacking the bishop on b6 as well, and I win due to the right triangle. Now, it's all because a5 has been played and the bishop is weak. If the pawns are back on a2 and a7, this idea with queen b3 simply does not exist. So, we get e4, I play knight d2 here, which is apparently a mistake. Probably here I should have played knight to e5, but after takes, knight g6 and fg6, black has this nice center with d5 and e4. If I play f3 to try and chip away here, black can play something like g5 with bishop f5 afterwards. And with this idea of bishop c7 as well, I have these serious weaknesses on the dark squares of the diagonal, and it just doesn't feel very good. So I play knight d2, we get cd5, and I play f3 here, trying to break the structure. We get takes, rook e8, queen takes f3. Now, it's worth pointing out that in chess, a lot of times, the approach is all about pawn structures and piece placement. Now, I can't remember the exact games that I had, but there were some games that I played in the past which had similar structures. For anybody who wants to be an internet sleuth, there was a game that I played against Vishy Anand in a Berlin where I lost in like 20 moves, where we had the same structure. Also against Levon Aroni at the FIDE Grand Prix in 2022, the third and final event. I also could have gotten the same structure with the black side as well. Now, the reason that I thought this was good is because in those two games, or at least according to my memory, I didn't feel very good about the pawn structure, and so I simply thought, it's an interesting pawn structure. I didn't like it from the black side. Why not play it from the white side? Except there's one key difference. In both of those games, just to go back for a second, the situation was a little bit different to where f3 was coming in here, where the rook was on the f-file. So basically, black did not have ideas like knight e4 right away. I could play on the f-file as well as using multiple diagonals. And as we'll see in the game, this is a huge difference. Because in the game here, after we get this position with queen f3, queen c6, my opponent Rasmus is threatening to play bishop takes d4. Let's say I go rook b1, takes, spaghetti-o. I take the bishop, lose my bishop, I'm down a pawn, and I'm probably going to resign soon. So I have to be very careful. Additionally, queen c6, while creating these threats, it also supports development of the bishop and the rook, and knight e4 down the road. So it's a very, very good multi-purpose move, which I completely underestimated. So here I played knight to e3 relatively quickly, and I think this is simply a bad move. If I was going to play this position probably the best way possible as a human, I would have played the move queen to f2 instead, and after bishop d7 and knight g3, computer still thinks black is much better after, say, rook e8 or bishop c7, but I have my knight on d2, which can very quickly go to f1, and I can try to bring the bishop and the rook into the game very quickly. So in the game, I play knight e3, we get bishop to d7, knight df1 is played here, we get rook to e8, and now I play knight g3, which is simply a bad move. Now the computer wants bishop d2, again, desperately trying to bring the rook into the game. I was very concerned that after knight e4 and bishop e1, my opponent Rasmus could play f5 with ideas like f4 or maybe knight g5. For example, say I go like rook d1, knight g5, and look at D's knights here. D's knights are really, really active and very scary. Even something like bishop c7 here, followed by knight g5 or f4, knight f4, it just looks really, really bad. Because besides having a cramped position with the pieces, I have no pawn breaks here. I don't ever really have c4 because black takes the pawn. b4, if I ever can play it, will simply weaken this pawn on d4, and I'll probably lose the game as well. So I have cramped pieces, no pawn breaks, and it's just miserable to play. So for that reason, I play knight g3 instead, and now Rasmus goes bishop c7, and I play the move queen f2. Now again, I could have had this position, if we go back to the other situation, right here. I could have had this position where after rook e8, I can play bishop d2 and bring the rook into the game. And the knight on f1 is actually much better than on e3 for two reasons. When we go back to the position in the game here, this position, the knight on e3 actually gives black ideas like knight to f4 here because the knight is in the way. Additionally, black can also play something like knight to e4 down the road as well. And this knight on e3, even though it looks nice to potentially pressure the pawn on d5, it's actually not doing anything at all. So in this position after queen f2, Rasmus here played bishop g3, which I think is a very poor move. I thought that in this position, if Rasmus had played knight to e4, I was very concerned because if I trade the knights and go bishop b3, hoping for bishop e6 and d5 with the classic forkaroo, this doesn't work because black can play knight to f4. And again, the knight on f4 is very, very active, and I think this is very, very hard to play for white. Now, I did see the best computer line, which is knight to g4, but after g5, I simply did not know how to proceed. Black's ideas like h5, maybe even like e3 down the road, even knight to d3 down the road as well, and it just looks really, really bad. So, Rasmus instead takes the knight on g3, and while this is still quite good for black, the problem is now the position simplifies, and besides that, when you look at the clocks, I actually was using a lot of time in this game because I could not figure out what a good plan was in the middle game, and I was clearly spotting stuff with a reasonably high degree of accuracy because I sensed that it was dangerous and I couldn't find ideas. So I'm very low on time, and even though this is still good for black, now pieces come off the board, and with less pieces on the board here, at least now I don't have a lot of different possibilities, so I should be able to get to time control at move 40 pretty easily. So here I go knight f1, and this is simply a pure gamble. In this position, bishop d2 is the move that I wanted to play, but I was very concerned about a move like queen b6, pressuring the pawn on b2 here. So I play rook to b1. Now there's knight to f4 with knight e2 ideas. Maybe the queen can even swing over to g6. And again, from a human standpoint, it just feels horrible. Also, of course, the pawn on a4 is also simply hanging all the time. So I decided instead to play knight f1, and my idea is very simple. I'm not going to move the bishop and the rook. I'm going to try to get this knight to f3. Say we get like king h7. Get this knight to f3 maybe, and then try to bring the bishop and the rook into the game. Now, again, it's a huge gamble because I'm basically wasting more time trying to move the knight to the best square, all the while leaving this bishop and rook on their original starting squares. So we get f5. I play knight to d2 here. And now Rasmus blunders with f4. Now, Rasmus, if he had played this move knight to f4, would have been technically winning. The reason I spent so long here after f5, 10 minutes plus, was specifically because I was worried about knight to f4, but I did not see a better way to play. If I were to play bishop d2, for example, black can go f4, and after queen to f2, queen b6 here, my knight on f1 cannot go to e3 or g3. The pawn restricts it. The pawn on b2 is weak. The pawn on a4 is weak. Black can swing the queen over and try to build a double stack on the e-file with a kebab following rook e2. So it just looks absolutely horrible. So finally, I'm like, okay, I have 5.5 minutes left. Just go for it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But you got to go for something active so you don't get too low on time and simply lose on the clock. So after knight e2, Rasmus plays f4. Now, the move to play was knight to f4, sacking the rook on e4. If I take the rook, there's knight to e2, which forks the king on g1 and the queen on g3. Now, here my intention was to play queen f3, but I would have lost the game because after rook to e1, king f2 check, king f1, it looks like the knight and the rook are both under serious attack. But here, black can go queen a6, and after c4, black can simply take the pawn, and after queen f4, c3, black reopens the long diagonal. If I take the pawn, there's rook to e4, creating the fossil, which wins the queen on f4 here, and I resign the game. Also, I saw that black could even go g5 here, but I thought after g3, for example, queen a6 and c4, I didn't see a forced win for Rasmus here. So because I didn't see the forced win, I thought, you know what? Hopefully I can survive. And actually, the computer thinks that I can survive in this specific position. So Rasmus instead plays f4, and now after queen to f2, while black maintains the advantage, now a lot of my moves become very easy to play. We have rook to e8, I go knight to f3 here, again, trying to bring the bishop and rook into the game, but also I have the idea of knight to e5 to trade off one more pair of knights. So we got bishop to f5, and now I play h4, which is apparently a mistake. I thought it was a good move. I did consider knight e5 right away, but after takes and g5, I was very worried that with black having this chain of 3 and the weak pawn on e5 that I probably was still losing. So instead, I play h4, and now Rasmus plays bishop g4. Apparently, what am I missing here? Apparently, after bishop g4, knight to e5 takes, black can play rook to f8 and keep a big advantage. Of course, I did not see this. I thought that h4 was a very good move here to try to play h5 and undermine the horse on g6. And now in this position, if black ever plays g5, I can always trade off one more set of pawns, potentially. Apparently, computer thinks after rook to f8 and bishop d2 and f3, black still is actually close to winning, which is kind of shocking to see the evaluation. But I thought already here, I was very close to saving the game. So Rasmus plays rook takes e5 here, and now after bishop takes f4, the danger is more or less gone. I'm still a little bit worse here, but with opposite color b's and what's going to be a safe king in a few moves, I should not be in danger. So we have rook e2, queen g3. Black does temporarily create the kebab on the 7th, but it doesn't really do a whole lot, and it's definitely not impaling the meat. So we get bishop to f5. I go rook to f1 here, finally bringing my rook into the game. This is move number 35. So for anybody who's watching this video who's a beginner, again, as they say in all those ads that you watch for like the motorcycle stunts or the car stunts, they say close track or, do professional driver, do not try this at home. Do not try to play a game of chess and leave a piece out of the game for 35 moves. Just do not do it. So move 35, finally I bring my rook into the game, and now we have bishop to e4. Of course, Rasmus trying to win the game here with the right triangle, but I can play rook f2, stopping the threats on the second rank, and now Rasmus has to trade the rooks and take the pawn on a4. But in this position, after bishop to e5 with the opposite color b's and the double wooden shields here, realistically, the game should be a draw. So we have queen d7, and now I play queen f4, and we get b5, king h2, king h7, and both of us have reached the time control. But it's very clear here that in this position, neither side will be able to make any progress, and the game will end in a draw. So I go bishop c7, we get a4, I go back, and now at least the pawns are fixed on the opposite color. His pawns are the same color as his bishop. My pawns are the same color as my bishop. And with both kings very, very weak here on the king side, there's nothing we can do. So we get queen e7, bishop d4, b4. I swap. I go queen to e5 here, lining up the double A battery and trying to checkmate on g7. Rasmus plays queen to b7, and now I play the move queen to f4 here. Now, this move isn't necessary, but it's simply a matter of waiting here on f4 and e5 or c3 and d4. Worth noting, though, if I play bishop c3 right away, black can maybe go d4 and take this pawn on g2, potentially. So I don't ever want to open up the diagonal. If I just leave the bishop on d4, there's no way for black to get to the pawn on g2. So we have queen d7, I play bishop c3, and now Rasmus plays the move queen to f5, and here he offers me a draw, which I accept. Black could try to play on, let's say, queen e7, but essentially what I do is I just always keep sitting with the bishop on these two squares, and if black ever tries to do something like queen to e8 to go queen g6, again, I can always just keep waiting, offer the trade of the queens, and queen f7, queen e5, and essentially, with these three squares available for my queen and the bishop always staying on d4, black can't do a lot. And finally, in the game, the final position where we agreed to a draw, after queen to f5, if the game continued, I would have traded, played king g3. Let's just say he goes bishop e4, king f2. If he goes king g6, I played g3. Everything's guarded here. The two pawns guard each other. Bishop's still spying the pawn. And eventually, we get some position like this, for example, where here I can just keep waiting on the two squares. Black can never really do a whole lot. Just even if you get the king here, I can always just sit and wait with the bishop yo-yoing between all these different squares on the long diagonal. And if black goes the other way, for example, right here, king f5, I can still keep waiting and then drop back and just mirror the king wherever it goes. And for all intents and purposes, the game will end with 50 moves and a draw. So game ends in a draw after queen f5. I get a first round draw against Rasmus Svane. Definitely not what I was hoping for, but considering the opening and how shaky of a game this was and the fact that I probably was completely lost at a couple of critical moments in the game, I cannot complain. So, a first round draw. Now, to keep everyone apprised, in the first round, Fabiano won, so he's in the lead. The other big player who I'm keeping an eye on, Alireza Firouzja, he also drew his first round game against the former FIDE world champion Ruslan Ponomarev. So both of us are not off to great starts, but it is only the first round, and this is an 11-round tournament, so there is a long way to go. On that note, for those of you guys who enjoyed this recap or my channel in general, make sure to smash that subscribe button below if you have not already. And I will be back tomorrow with a recap after round 2 of the Grand Swiss being played here in the Isle of Man.